Hey guys, welcome back to Pokemon TCG Pocket. In today's video, I wanted to do my own tier list of the meta decks in the game currently. Keep in mind, it is super early days, and I have not tested absolutely every deck in the game yet. When I test decks, I do like to play them for a day or two and really get a good feel for them before I do. So on this list, I do have all the decks that I feel like I have thoroughly tested enough. The only one that I feel like I haven't tested enough over here is going to be the Venusaur one, but I have a fair grasp on that from my testing and also playing against it a lot. Just in editing, I wanted to put some extra clarity into this list. This is based off the decks that we are seeing be really strong at the moment. So if we expand and put every deck into it, all these decks, except for Nidoking, we'll talk about that later, would probably be spread across S, A, and B, but I'm just doing this to give further separation on these higher ranked decks, and I'm going to use this as my basis as I test more decks to put them in where I see them fit based on this. And yes, I may squish it up eventually, but I just wanted to separate some of the stronger decks that I'm seeing at the moment. Also, we've got it in the S, A, B, C, D tiers. You could call them whatever you want. This is just to segregate the power of them. But once again, these are all pretty awesome decks, except for, once again, Nidoking, which we'll talk about later on. Now, massive shout out to Pokemon Zone. They've got their own sort of tier list here, along with deck builds. So I'm going to refer to them for deck builds when we just go through it, because the deck builds in this game are fairly standardized. There are some different flex options, and I'll go through their deck builds and some changes that I like in some of these decks. But in general, I just want to separate the tiers a bit more from what my personal thoughts have been. Once again, early days, take with a massive grain of salt. I just love these videos so I can talk about decks, because I just love talking about this stuff because it's fun. So let's get into it. Now, once again, on my list, I've only got these decks listed, but you know, if there are definitely other decks. I am dying to do a Marchamp deck on one of my accounts, but I've only got one Marchoke and I got like 3 Marchamps and it's killing me, but we will get around to that eventually. So let's go into the first one, and that's going to be what I think is the actual S tier deck in the game currently, and that is going to be the Starmie deck. Now, if we go over here into Pokemon Zone, I want to just take a look at their lists. There are two main variants of this one. There's the Starmie with Articuno, and there's the Starmie with Greninja. A lot of people I see out there prefer, and a lot of people that I talk to on Discord prefer the Articuno, which I do agree. But the one thing I will say about this deck is the Articuno build relies more heavily on Misty working. The great thing about this deck is that it is insane, both versions of it. The thing about the Starmie deck that makes it ridiculous is that, one, it is good even without Misty, and Misty is the icing on the cake, whereas a lot of other water decks, you need Misty to make them work. Like, you need to flip the heads, because if you flip tails on Misty, a lot of decks are kind of screwed. With Charizard decks, for instance, if you use Moltres and you like flip 3 tails first up, it's just game over. So there's a lot of RNG dependency, but this deck is also incredibly efficient and reliable, even if you don't win the Misty, especially the Greninja one. Because when we look at the Greninja one, you've got Froakie and Frogadier that are only a 1 energy cost attack, so they can go ahead and slap those out. The Misty is just like a nice icing on the cake if you get like an early setup Starmie and you can get it 1 turn earlier, and you're only relying on 1 heads. Whereas other decks that you look at, so kind of like if you try to play Gyarados, if you try to play Blastoise, you really need those Misties to come through bigger. But even in the transition to the Articuno EX version, if you get an Articuno EX at the start, then you kind of really need that Misty to work. And the other big difference between Articuno EX and Greninja, I love the Greninja version against this deck's hardest matchup, which is the Pikachu EX version, because you have some one prize or 1 point units or cards that you can basically just fodder off. So if you have a Froakie, you have a Frogadier, you can put them in and use them as a 1 point sacrifice, and you can get 2 of those in this deck against the Pikachu matchup, which is very important. So I do much prefer this build against the Pikachu matchup, but this build against pretty much everything else in general. But I am a big fan of the Greninja, so this is one of my favorites personally. Also, the one other change you can make in this one is also dropping some potions for the addition of Giovanni. That is something that I run in mine personally in my Greninja Starmie deck, because I find, once again, you can fodder off those Frogadiers, Greninjas, Froakies, whatever you want, and make them take the damage, and you can just protect your Starmie. Starmie has the 0 retreat cost, so being able to protect Starmie by foddering off these guys and letting them take the damage allows you to drop the potions, because you can still live a Pikachu EX, even a Pikachu EX using the Giovanni, because that only gets to 120 on the Starmie, so Starmie is safe against that if you keep it topped off, and then using your own Giovanni in this one can allow you to get some clutch kills in this one. For instance, against the Pikachu EX, it allows you to use the Starmie with the 100 and then use the extra 20 from Greninja to knock out a Pikachu EX, which is super clutch in certain situations, and that's only possible with the Giovanni. So that is the one card that I would consider adding in there. But once again, I do think this is far and away the best deck in the game currently. It is just so powerful, and it's so quick and so reliable. A lot of these decks have heavy RNG behind them, but this one, you can get the bonus RNG with Misty, but at most, especially in the Greninja build, all you need is one heads from Misty and it's like turbocharging you, and that's all you'll ever need from it. So I think it is just by far the best deck. Now, if I had to say, I would put Pikachu probably in the A tier, but I will put it next to this one because it is a very similar in the way it functions. Now, if we go back over here and we take a look at some of the Pikachu EX decks, this is one of my favorite decks as well. Now, I personally prefer, they don't actually have the build on this one, but I actually prefer running the 2 Pikachu EX with the 1 Zapdos EX, sometimes 2 depending on the situation, and then running the Zebra Striker build, because then that gives you back row access, and also the Voltorb Electrode, because the Electrode also gives you a free retreat. That is my preferred build. This is definitely a build, but I find whenever I play this one, I just don't end up using that Raichu, and Lieutenant Surge just bricks in my hand, and that is the way I feel about it. So I much prefer the other way of playing Pikachu EX, but this one is a very fast and strong deck. The one problem that I have in Pikachu is, like, Starmie's one downfall is that, you know, you need to evolve a Staryu into Starmie to make it work. This one is, if you just don't get enough benched Pokemon, you're kind of bricked, but it is pretty reliable to go ahead and do it, because you have got Pokeballs, you have got Professor's Research, hopefully you can get, and you run 6 basic Pokemon, you should be able to fill in that bench and go. But the one sleeper unit in this deck is the Zapdos. A lot of people focus on that Pikachu EX. Often in this deck, I will just run that Zapdos up, and I will just start slapping the energies on, and I will just flip and enjoy the RNG, and hopefully you get 150 damage and you can knock out most things in the game. Now, the other thing that's huge about this deck is that a lot of decks are running the legendary birds. You got Moltres in Charizard, you've got Articuno being used in a ton of things, you've got Zapdos obviously being run in this one, so even in the mirror match, but all the birds are weak against electric, so having that electric element is really strong, not only against Starmie because it's the top deck, but against all of the birds as well, which can be super clutch in a lot of situations. So that is that deck. I really do like this deck. Like I said, I prefer the other version, the non-Raichu version, but it is still a really solid version of the deck. Moving on from that, I personally think that the next tier is going to be Charizard. I think Charizard is the next best deck after this. Now, it is a little bit RNG reliant, but due to the fact that if we go ahead and take a look at their one here, due to the fact that we are running the, basically, this, honestly, to me, this is the only way to play this deck. I don't have another build. You do not need to put into this deck any Giovannis, because you just have the massive hard-hitting Charizard. And essentially, if you can just get these two on board, now, the only place this does brick is sometimes you just don't draw those evolutions, but every 3-stage deck has that issue. But the Moltres, I like the Moltres because you have 3 flips guaranteed. It's not like Misty, you get 1 tails, it's done. Now, sometimes you do get 3 tails, but if you get 1 or 2 heads with Moltres, you know, and then you get another 1 or 2 the next turn, you're pretty much set up to make that Charizard beefy as hell. And at the end of the day, as long as you can get 5 energy onto that Charizard before he goes up for his first attack, he's going to live through anything that your opponents have to throw at you, as long as you keep him fully healthy, and as long as you get him to that 5 energy, it's pretty much GG's, because you just go, you bring him up, you knock something out, they put in their next unit, you knock them out. Now, that is relying on one of those units being an EX, obviously, but normally there are going to be EXs in decks. So the Charizard, I just think this whole deck, like I said, this is pretty much the only way. I don't see, if you guys have a different Charizard EX build, let me know, but this one is just so reliable and strong. Once again, sometimes you do brick on the evolution, sometimes you do brick by triple tails on the Moltres. But in general, you run the X speed. So if you do get the Charmander first up, you have to put him in. Then you maybe Pokeball or research into a Moltres. Then you can use the X speed to drop the Charmander out, put him back in the back row, put the Moltres up, then put the energy on the Moltres. Then you get the flips anyway. It's just, I find this one to be just a steady, cool deck, and plus it's Charizard, and I absolutely love Charizard. So that is that one. Now, the next deck that I actually think is the next two decks, I'm happy to put them in the same tier, but I think Charizard beats them. I'd almost be tempted to put them down a tier. Something like this, but I think I will put them next to the Charizard because they are incredibly strong decks, but they both just get melted by the Charizard, in my opinion. Actually, no, I'm going to leave Charizard there on his own and put these two down the bottom. So let's go ahead and go into, let's do Mewtwo first, because I want to chat about Mewtwo because that is one I have played with a lot as well. Like I mentioned at the start, Venusaur is one I haven't used as much. So Mewtwo, once again, this is the only way. If you look at every deck, you'll notice there's normally only two lines of Pokemon, except for me with the Pikachu deck that I like playing, which is the one where you got multiple lines. But this one, you're always doing this, and the reason you'll find that you've normally got like a 3-stage evolution and a basic, or a 3 and a 2, or a basic and a 2, is because it allows you to get a starting hand, because the game always deals you a basic Pokemon. So in this one, you got a 50% chance of having a Mewtwo or a Ralts in your hand at the start, and that's why every deck is formed this way. It just makes them so much more reliable. But the big thing with this one is, I don't like this as much as Charizard, because you can't come in and just one-hit KO anything in the game. There's a lot of things that 150 is not going to work against. And unlike the Charizard deck, where you just fully load it on the back end and then bring him forward and just get 2 KOs and it's done, once again relying on the EX kill, with Mewtwo EX, you kind of need to leave him in the front. Gardevoir has the awkward thing of only being able to attach to the Pokemon in the active spot. So by having Mewtwo EX in that active spot, he's getting chip damage. And that chip damage is going to cause him to get killed. And to start getting the extra energy ramp up, you've got to wait at least 3 turns if you have the right hand to get into Gardevoir to start getting that ramp up. So you can't get him ramped up into an early, I'll call it ultimate, but side drive. And by the time you get there, I find he's taken too much chip damage and he's down. So I don't like this one as much as Charizard EX. In some situations, yes, it can work really well. But in general, it's strong. I just don't see it as strong as Charizard EX. The one advantage that it does have is that you have the Mewtwo EX being a basic, so you can just slap him up, you can get 2 energy on him, you can use that Psychic Sphere, and by the time you've got that 2 energy on him, you've done 2 Psychic Spheres. The turn after that, you'll ideally have your Gardevoir up, and then you can attach 1 energy, use Gardevoir, and then you're using your Side Drive. But the problem with Side Drive with that situation is, if you know how to play Mewtwo EX, you can see this coming, and you can just basically put it in a fodder unit, a fodder card, like a one pointer, to just take that hit, and then you can come back with your EX and wipe the Mewtwo out, because the Mewtwo's normally taking chip damage. So that is my problem with Mewtwo EX deck. I do think it's solid, but I just don't see it as quality as Charizard EX. The only time Charizard EX falls off is when you brick on evolutions, because then you just can't do the damage. However, Moltres you can stack the energies on Moltres and do a little bit of damage, but in general, that is my thoughts there. The other one we have in this tier is going to be the Venusaur EX, and I honestly think that the Venusaur EX could be better than Mewtwo, but I haven't tested it enough myself. So this is one build. I think the better build is, do they have it here? Okay, so this is honestly my favorite build of it, because this one, the thing about Lilligant, I like the fact that Lilligant is reliable. So you just get that attack out, you get to put a grass energy on the bench. There's no flipping involved. These are just really reliable decks that have a playstyle and you stick to them. And I think that is the great thing. You've got Erica in this deck as well, so you've got massive healing capacity, and this deck really dominates and really strong against the Pikachu EX deck. It's also strong against the whatchamacallit deck, the Starmie deck, but I do think the Starmie deck does have an advantage over it, especially if you're running Articuno in this one, because you do get that extra splash damage, which is going to be nice out of the Articuno. So this one, best matchup, in my opinion, is going to be against the Pikachu EX deck, but it's just super solid. There's so much sustain. You got potions, you got Ericas. and you can just really just set yourself up. But like I did mention, I personally prefer the Executor EX version of it. The Executor EX version is super clutch in my opinion, because once again, you've got that one cost tropical swing, which, you know, you do need to flip the heads. It does add some RNG into it, but this is the one I do like most because it gives you aggression early on, and because you've got to slowly get those energies onto the Venusaur EX, you're only sacrificing one early energy onto the Executor, but that could give you enough pressure on the enemy team that they have to start switching out their cards to avoid getting kills, so they're going to have to start using those X speeds and also paying retreat costs, which puts you at an advantage in energies, and so that's why I like this one the most. I like that little bit of added aggression that it brings, as opposed to this one being more passive because you don't get the aggression. So that is the way I look at it. This one's very interesting to me, running the two Caterpies just to get your get the puzzle pieces into your hand. But once again, I do personally prefer this Executor EX, and honestly, sometimes with this one, you can just like end up benching and evolving two Executor EX and just win with them and not even touch the Venusaur, which is quite insane. So that is that one. Moving on from that, the next deck that I'm going to put in is going to be Dragonite. Now, if we go ahead and we look at Dragonite, this is probably one of my dogs just scratching at the door. Give me one sec. Sorry, it appears there's thunderstorms outside. I didn't even notice, and the dog's going absolutely nuts. Now, my personal favorite version of the Dragonite deck is going to be the Frostmoth version. It's my favorite way to stall. I know that the Koga wheezing is a thing. I just don't like it as much. It's just not my playstyle. I much prefer the Frostmoth. This also allows you to run the Misty, and hopefully with this aspect, I mean, both of these, you're just placing manually your energies onto the Dragonite. With this one, you're not running any dark energy, and you're just basically putting the poison out, using Wheezing to stall so you can place all the energies on Dragonite, and then using a Koga to flip him back into your hand. So, I mean, it's pretty solid, but I much prefer this one because Frostmoth can really lock out with the sleep. It's RNG based once again, but I do prefer this build personally. Now, Dragonite is one of my favorite decks. It is so satisfying to go ahead and use Draco Meteor and then just drop all the damage on the enemy board. It is so cool. The problem with this deck is that it is so slow. You've got to manually place 4 energies on your Dragonite to get him to be able to hit. And the problem with that is when we look at these other decks, honestly, it has a better matchup against the top decks than it does against against the next 3. And the reason being with these ones is, you know, if we look to Charizard, you've got Moltres and Charizard. Charizard has 180 HP. Moltres has 140. You can just set up a bench of all of them, or at least like normally 2 Moltres and maybe 1 Charizard, maybe 1 Charmander. You know what I mean? You can set, by the time Dragonite gets manually placed 4 energies, these 3 decks, being Charizard, Mewtwo, and Venusaur, can have such a tanky bench that once Dragonite finally does use his Draco Meteor, he's not actually going to land a kill on anything. And then being at 160, Venusaur, once again, it's RNG based. You will get 2 hits out of the Dragonite, except against Charizard, because Charizard can just straight 1-hit kill. But against these 2 decks, you do have a chance on that second one to go. But in general, like, as much as I love this deck, and it is super satisfying if the enemies get bricked and they don't get their bench set up, just with how long it takes to set up the Dragonite, these decks just have too much time to fill out a bench that is going to just live too well. And then the big one is with the Charizard especially, that he can return fire with that with the big 200 damage and just wipe it out, and then there goes the whole strategy essentially. But honestly, Dragonite, I'm going to keep experimenting with this deck like above and beyond, because I absolutely love it. Now, next to Dragonite, believe it or not, I'm going to put the Arbok. This is the deck that this was the deck I was theory crafting when we first saw the cards, and it was like one of the first decks I wanted to build, and it's honestly probably my favorite deck, and that is the Arbok Pidgeot deck, which I have dubbed the Flying Cobra. Now, let's go look at this deck. I don't know if their deck build here is the same. Do they have it? Arbok Pidgeot, here it is. So this is the deck here. Now, It is super, super solid. Now, you can drop the Sabrina for an extra potion. This deck is actually really technical. The reason I love this deck so much is because it's very, very technical to play. You do a ton of switching, and it's honestly just incredibly fun. It takes a lot of manipulation of switching to make sure your Arbok can come in, lock enemies in, and then not die as well. I personally prefer running double potion instead of a Sabrina. The Sabrina's here because if it's taking you a while to get your Pidgeot, you can use the Sabrina to do the same strategy. The problem is, whenever I tried Sabrina in this deck, I just drew Sabrina way too late, and I was like, I don't need this anymore. So personal bias, I prefer running the double potion as opposed to the Sabrina. Now, you definitely need the Giovanni in here. Giovanni is a must. He allows you to get kills that you otherwise wouldn't, especially when we look at using Arbok against sort of the Pikachu EX decks. Because Pikachu EX is only doing 90 damage against the Arbok, unless they have a Giovanni, then you're kind of screwed. You can run in against that Pikachu EX, you can run a Giovanni, get 70 damage on the first one, get 60 damage on the second one, and you go ahead and land that KO. And as long as you keep your Arbok healthy, which is once again important to have the potions, you can actually put this guy in as soon as they put a Pikachu EX in, and you can just trap it and 2-hit kill it, and yes, the next turn your Arbok will die, but you've traded 2 points for 1 point, and it's so satisfying. And then obviously the Pidgeot is here for that drive off, but Pidgeot, once again, only having the 2-cost wing attack at 70. As I mentioned before, if you don't draw into the Giovanni and you have the Arbok up, you can use the Arbok, trap them, and then switch into the Pidgeot, and then go ahead and hit. So this is honestly one of my favorite decks. Probably the next video I'll make is this deck, because it is so incredibly fun, and it's technical. It doesn't always win. Obviously, it's one of those more rogue decks, but it's so fun to trap people and just get the KOs like that. It's ridiculously satisfying, and often what you do with this deck is you work on getting a kill on their EX Pokemon first up by trapping them with an Arbok. And then after that, if they send in another EX, you just drive them off. And then they've normally got to send something else weaker in. And then you can go ahead and trap again with your next Arbok. It's honestly one of my favorite decks, but I think this one could definitely climb up. I'm just not, like, I'd be tempted to almost put it in here. It is honestly working really well. But I want to, before I put this one up anywhere, I need to test against people who I know are playing really well with all the other decks, and really test its functionality. But I do really love this deck. Now, the final deck that I have tested is Nidoking. Now, I'm going to put it down here in D. It actually probably belongs in E, F, G. Dude, the only reason I did this is because Nidoking is my favorite Pokemon. If you guys watch me along the way, you know Nidoking is the best. Wait. Shiny Nidoking is the best, but like my absolute favorite, and I was just like, I can't wait to make this Nidoking, Nidoqueen deck work. It just sucks. It's slow as hell. The damage isn't enough. It's just so trash. I will keep trying to make it work because Nidoking, like I said, is my favorite. But the deck's just shit, guys. It kills me. It absolutely kills me. I'm not going to show you the deck build. It's just pretty much running 4 Nidorans, 2 Nidorinos, 2 Nidorinas, 2 Nidoqueens, 2 Nidokings. You know, your Professor's Research, your Pokeballs. It's, dude, it was the deck I wanted to be good so bad. Unfortunately, it ain't. But once again, that is my thoughts on it. If we jump back over here into a Pokemon Zone, which I'll leave linked in the description, I do think these are pretty good tiers that they have laid out. Like I said, I just wanted to separate it a little bit more. Like I said, I think Starmie is by far the best deck currently, with Pikachu coming up into that same tier just because it does counter that. But these high aggro decks that don't rely on flipping to function is absolutely fantastic. They just get so much pressure out so early because of the 2 energy cost. Pikachu has the condition of needing the full bench. Starmie has the condition of needing to evolve it. But besides that, these are 2 incredibly solid decks. Like I said, Starmie better, but Pikachu has the advantage over it, and the Electric does have the advantage over all the birds, which does give it clutch extra damage in certain situations. Charizard, I just think, is better than these 2 decks. Against the Venusaur matchup, you have the advantage, and you also just basically one-hit kill anything anyway, so it doesn't even matter. And against the Mewtwo deck, Mewtwo just sits too far forward and takes too much chip damage, and you can just clap it with a lot of things that you can't do against Charizard because you're just having that Moltres Moltres at the front, and it's just all about setup and then come in and sweep. Dragonite, absolutely love this. Draco Meteor is huge, but at the moment there's too many chunky decks, and it just kind of struggles against that a little bit, and it's very heavily RNG dependent, but holy crap is it fun. This Arbok Pidgeot deck, the Flying Cobra, dude, it could go up. In my personal bias, it would be up there, but it's too early for me to actually ramp it up. But yeah, I'm going to definitely heavily test this one because I absolutely love this deck. Nidoking, absolute trash. Over here, they do go through the Blaine deck. The single point Lightning, they also go through the 18 trainer with using the, whatchamacallit? The Articuno EX, and basically you just guarantee that. Hopefully you get a Misty and then you just clap. So I think that one's a bit more cheese. I don't know if that's going to stay there. But Marowak, like I said, I'm working on trying to build a Marchamp deck because Marchamp's just cool and I've got all the rare versions of it. So we will try that as well. But yeah, great builds in here if you want to go ahead and look at some builds over here on Pokemon Zone. But that is my thoughts on the tier list so far. Once again, it's early days, but I just enjoyed having a bit of a chat about the decks. So that is my thoughts around the current meta. It's probably going to change, but at the end of the day, you can play whatever the hell you want because it's just all casual and casual matches anyway. But as always, guys, thanks for watching. Hope you have an awesome day, and I look forward to seeing the next one. Cheers.